Are we ready? All right, let's call the order of the meeting of the Economic Development Council Board of Directors. The first item of business is to review the prior meeting minutes from February 18th and June 9th, 2020. Those are in your packets. I assume you had an opportunity to review those. If so, I'd entertain a motion to approve both minutes.
Kyle Luther with the CVB. Motion to approve.
Kyle, thank you. Motion?
Jay
Jeff?
Alberti, Chamber, second.
Jay, second. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Any opposed? Thank you very much. Next item up on the agenda is the financial report. Shannon.
Actually, there is one other order of business in there, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. The executive committee minutes that are in your packet are for information only. We just wanted to make sure you all had access to those minutes. No action needed on those, information only. Shannon, financials.
Okay, the financial report is as was sent to you in advance. The executive summary on the front outlines noteworthy items. Many of you here were here just a few moments ago, so I won't bore you with reciting everything, except I'll hit the highlight that we project at year end will have a savings due to the vacancy of the CEO position of around $100,000. That the executive committee took action this morning to reallocate about 33 of that towards some unbudgeted IT and legal expenses, but those expenses will be recognized the net expenses will be realized as a savings to the member entities 1/3 apiece. That is your financial report through May.
Thank you, Shannon. Are there any questions from anybody about the financials? No? Nothing? Discussion? Motion to approve the financials? Second. All those in favor of approving the financial report, please signify by saying aye. Any opposed? All righty. Next item on the agenda is the EDC governing documents. And these documents in your packet are identical to the ones that presented at the June 9th board meeting. Shannon, do you want to lead us through starting with the bylaws?
It'd be my pleasure. The bylaws were recommended at the last meeting of the executive committee for this board's approval. Of course, last week we introduced it, and since then there's been a lot of discussions. There's been the management team has gotten together. I personally have observed and heard some issues and concerns that I'm going to suggest to you be considered as an amendment to the bylaws. There's some of these are just my observations. Some of it's what I've heard from a CVB board meeting, for example, and some discussions with the management team. If you'll bear with me, I'd like to pull it in front of on the screen. But just handed out to you was a marked up version, assuming all of the proposed changes were accepted, just so that you were able to see what these proposed additional changes are. Starting on page 3, there's a reference to the EDC's budget and it characterizes it as an overhead and staffing budget. The EDC's budget, if it's to fulfill its mission, is going to be more than just overhead and staffing. It's going to have some function beyond that, and I think it's more appropriate to call it simply an annual budget rather than characterize it as just overhead and staffing. Suggest that change. Also at the bottom of that page and bleeding onto the next one under duties of the board of directors, it states that the board of directors will approve a budget for each of the member entities. The EDC board doesn't have the legal authority to adopt budgets for the member entities. It may have meant to be read a different way, but we're suggesting just simply strike that. And it'll be appropriate that the EDC Board of Directors approve a budget as set out herein. Also, in the following paragraph, there's a rather complicated rendering of how job descriptions and day-to-day tasks and EDC CEO responsibilities and the board responsibilities and changes to the job description have to come before the full board, which, as you know, doesn't meet very often. That all works, but the proposal is for this to be simplified. Strike all those, simply try to hit the mark for the same language by saying the budget as set herein shall also include all administrative costs for its operations, including program costs and consolidated staffing costs. Staffing costs shall be comprehensive and include all positions irrespective of their functional area or member entity affiliation. In short, the budget is to include all 22 staff, not just its shared staff. But of course also, as is not mentioned, program costs and the like. The composition paragraph was changed.
Hey, Shannon, I have a question.
Yes, sir.
So, and I see what you're doing there. Have these changes been run by legal counsel?
No, sir.
Okay. So were they even consulted, legal counsel?
Not at this point. This is just yesterday, and I expected them to be here this morning, and I'm sorry they were not. We've reached out to them twice. I've not been able to reach them. On page 4, the composition had been recommended to be changed, and is still pending this body's decision to reduce it from 19 to 13. However, there was some language in the next page, on page 5, that is only relevant if there are the 19 members, meaning the additional 6, 2 each from each member entity appointment. You see, we've proposed striking out that language because it's irrelevant if you don't have those positions to manage their terms. Page 6, it says that the CEO, the executive committee duties they will negotiate with the president and CEO for his or her contract relationship. I've proposed that you broaden that to allow for simply negotiation of their employment relationship, not necessarily contract relationship, because there may not be a contract involved. A contract may be, but this will allow either way. You could simply pursue an employee at will relationship and maybe not an employment agreement or contract if this is adopted as shown. Page 8. This particular section is referring to administrative employees, but it includes some direction about the budget that really doesn't relate to the administrative employees. And it's recommended that it actually be, for instance, it tells that this document, this budget is supposed to be to have goals. Well, that's not currently a process, and I don't think it's the intent, as I listened to the executive committee, for the budget process to include goals. My suggestion is to allow the budget to speak for itself in that part of the bylaws and strike it from here. It would read, the EDC will enter into a yearly budget agreement called the annual budget agreement, which is the actual name for that agreement, with each of the member entities that will provide unified staffing to achieve the purpose of the EDC and its member entities, and strike the rest and allow that to be spoken of in the budget portion of the bylaws. then the next page, under CEO duties, seems to be an emphasis here to talk about how the CEO is to do their job versus what they are to do. The middle line is a case in point. I suggest replacing that with something that is even more effective. In my opinion, EDC CEO will be accountable for and evaluated on and the development and execution of the board's strategic plans, stewardship of its powers and resources, as well as the day-to-day performance of all staff regardless of functional area or member entity affiliation. A lot of that verbiage that is proposed to restrict is strictly to establish that the CEO is to be responsible for all 22 staff. That is well said in the proposed changes, but also adds something that is not in the bylaws anywhere and is basically his or her true duties, and that is more than just supervising staff. It's accountable for and development of and execution of the strategic plans, the stewardship of powers and resources, as well as that. Page 12, that's under funds. There's a redundant line in there. It can stay. It's not that imperative, but that is said elsewhere. The thing we've seen with bylaws and all the other governing documents is if you say it one place and you say it again, inevitably you update one area and then the other page, you end up in a conflict even inside the same document. So if we can get that to one place, much the better. And then the budget, and this is where it references the budget, really the same process with the addition of clarity that the budget will include all administrative costs for operations, program costs, and consolidated staffing costs as defined herein. And of course, the definition you saw in Section 3, or Article 3, Section 1, I believe, and that is that it will include all 22 staff. And that is all that I kind of gleaned from discussion with management team, with this observation at CVB board meeting, and of course my own thoughts. I suggest that for consideration.
All right, any questions on any of those amendments that Shannon just presented? Questions, discussions, clarifications? Wally, go ahead.
I've got some questions. As you read through this, the primary purpose of this appears to be to appoint a CEO. On the page 1, under purpose, it calls for the president/CEO. Don't we need to clean that up to make it all consistent instead of having different titles? That's one item.
All right. Where do you have the other ones noted? Because when you say president and CEO, do we call it something different later?
We call it CEO in most places through here, not president.
Gotcha. Okay.
You know, it seemed like that the last change we made changed it to CEO, so I'm not sure how that came in.
I think that's an easy thing that
typo,
we can
yeah.
do is simply define president and CEO as CEO throughout, that way that it's understood.
Agreed. All right.
My next question is, the CEO will have, and the EDC board will have full authority over the employees. If the IDB wants to give a bonus to the EDC or to the IDB executive director, who is not under our purview anymore, it appears, how do we do that then? Because he's not our employee, we can't do that very well, can we? How are we going to handle that?
Well, right now, let me address that, because right now we have an incentive plan, and any bonus would follow the incentive plan. And so, I mean, that's how we would do it.
But I don't think it's covered in this document.
Well, it's not an IDB document, it's an EDC document, so why would it? I mean, why would it be covered?
Shannon, do you have any comment on that?
Only that the IDB board will be consulted as the budget is adopted, and if it's their will to have funding for an incentive plan, that'll be included, and then the CEO will have the ability to execute that with the adopted budget.
Well, I'm not sure whether that answers your question or not. If the IDB board wants to do an incentive or a bonus that's outside of what's approved in the budget, is that what you're asking, or? Okay. Shannon, can you speak to that?
Outside the budget, it would have to be a discussion about, from the IDB first, of whether they want to fund it, how they would fund it. And then, of course, they would make that request to the EDC.
Wally, right now, we do, correct me if I'm wrong, but in our budget process, we do budget, we budget for that. So, yes, we do. Well,
It would be included in that.
but it would be
budget.
included, it would be included, because that budget item for that item is part of those direct expenses that you see on the bottom of the line. When you're looking at the budget, you've got the operational cost, and then you've got the direct salaries. Well, that budget is included in there. So it's part of the EDC budget, because it's part of the IDB direct cost budget.
Other questions, either about the amendments or about, excuse me, the bylaws, the proposed amendments?
This is Cheryl Langford with the IDB. I just have a question for clarification. So each member entity will still approve their own budget. Is that correct? Every year? I mean, and the reason I'm saying that is because, on the IDB, we've got loans out there and so forth, and will any of that have to be changed and approved through the EDC now going forward, or in the past that might be in the works now? I mean, how is all that going to be affected?
Yeah,
The answer to that, I believe, correct me, but yes, we will be approving our budget.
Own
the
budget,
only change to their budget process is it will not include salaries, benefits, and taxes.
Okay.
Wally?
I have another question concerning in the IDB, we have a confidentiality and a conflict of interest clause. Will the EDC adopt that now, because they will have more control over what we do?
Shannon, what do you think on that?
There's nothing in the documents, in fact, it actually clearly states that the EDC can't direct the boards what to do. So we won't have, the EDC won't have, the board won't have any impact on, as you said, more control over, they won't have any more control over what you do. They simply will oversee the staff. We already sign all staff sign confidentiality agreements, and on the occasion that EDC staff are drawn in to a circle of confidence for any one particular project, they're additionally required to sign such. That's a rare occasion, and I don't expect that to change. But in the case of the CEO who may be brought in, for example, to work with the IDB board, they would be required to sign that as well.
Would the members of the EDC have to also sign it?
All
The board-
staff members.
Board members?
All board members? All board members sign the same confidentiality statement that all the employees, all 22 staff do. On a case-by-case or project basis, that would depend on the case, and it would extend to EDC staff if they were involved in the project.
Yeah, the handling of an industrial prospect is very critical, and it can be messed up real bad, real quick without the confidentiality and the conflict of interest clauses. I have concern, we at the EDC don't have to sign anything right now, but as IDB, we do.
All EDC staff sign the same agreement
I'm
that
not
the
talking about
IDB
staff, I'm
does.
talking about the board.
And the board, they all sign the same agreement that they'll abide by the conflict of interest and code of conduct. Again, there may be other NDAs with projects, but those are limited in scope and,
Shannon,
Yes, sir.
but on a day-to-day basis or a board meeting basis, we wouldn't be dwelling in the individual job duties of the IDB. So we wouldn't be brought to the table every time that Frank's got a prospect. Y'all are still doing that in-house. That's not going to come to our table every day or during our meeting. So we wouldn't know about those like we don't know about them now. So that confidentiality will stay with that, you know, legislative group to do that because they have those powers that the EDC board doesn't. So where Wally's talking about that, we're not going to know that day-to-day stuff unless we were on that board. What Frank's doing now is Frank's going to continue to do, and we're not going to know what Frank's doing till it's done like we do now.
And quite frankly, there's a lot of things that the IDB board doesn't even know, okay? I mean, a lot of that stuff is, well, it is, Frank. I mean, for that very reason. So none of that, in my view, is going to change. And obviously, if there's an EDC CEO, we would expect that person to adhere to the rules like everybody else does, which is, you know, we don't talk about things. So I don't see that as an issue personally.
All right, other questions or discussion?
Chairman,
Yes.
Kyle Luther with CVB. This isn't really a question, but just more a statement. All of the changes that Shannon mentioned sound good. I think, me personally, I would prefer if the legal counsel could take a look at it just to make sure we're not putting ourselves in the corner on something, you know, since he's legally or whatnot, that we're not getting ourselves in something with the wording. Just a statement.
All right, fair enough. Wally?
Next question I've got concerns the Article 7, which is committees. Should we list the standing committees in that section, like, for instance, the Finance Committee, the Property Committee, Executive Committee, and so forth? And then I know that there would be times that you could have a special committee for different reasons, but should we list them in there?
I'm not sure we've ever listed them before, have we, Shannon? It's,
the only committees that have been established in the bylaws is Executive Committee. And up until the CBID P&D Committee, there really was no other committees. If it's the will of this board, we can establish that let me back up. There is one for Finance Committee. It's in the bylaws. It's not set out by itself as its own committee. If the will of the board, we could add another standing committee, but it is in there. That's the only two we have. Both of them are in there. Maybe not in that paragraph. Can you direct me what page it is?
On
10.
page 9, it starts about the committees, and then on 10, but we do refer to the Finance Committee and the Property Committee at different places in here, but yet they're not listed under the committees. That's the reason I'm wondering, should it be set up with a certain standing committees
I think that's
listed in there?
that's a fair change. We can make that. I can't probably do that on the fly, but
okay, well, we certainly can do that. There would be the Finance Committee. What are the other standing committees?
looks like a Property Committee as well,
Property Committee, Finance Committee?
Executive Committee.
Exe-
And now there's a nominating committee. I stand corrected. Yes, there's quite a few, it
Are,
looks like.
are all those committees referenced in the bylaws?
They're referenced, they're just not consolidated under the
Right.
committee. They're all in there.
Well, I mean, doesn't it clearly say, in addition to those committees specifically required by the bylaws? Yeah, it gives the chairman, the way I read it, gives the chairman the ability, if he wanted to create an ad hoc committee to talk about bringing a fair to Montgomery County or to the city of Clarksville, the chair, with the approval of the board, could create that committee. But all other committees required by the bylaws are in the
already-
bylaws.
Already listed. Fair enough. Probably don't need to list them then. You okay with that, Wally?
I would think that if we have a paragraph on committees, there ought to be something about those committees in there, but maybe I'm wrong.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, if you look at the subsection of that piece, it's talking about the creation of committees only. It's not mentioning standing committees. So the subsection is just talking about the creation. So
Good.
it doesn't have anything
That's
about
correct.
the listing.
The heading is creation of committees rather than listing standing committees. Most of them are addressed other places in the bylaws already. Other questions, concerns, comments? We're getting near the end of this. Getting ready to call for a vote.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
Kyle Luther with CVB. I understand the reason why we lowered the board members down to 13. Is there any concern that with those, the 9 members from the executive committee being the same 9 members represented on the full board? Just, I guess, no additional members at all?
Say that again.
With the chain, or with the non-member, the executive committee and full board, or executive board and full board being practically the same as far as representation from the 3 organizations. Just wondering if that's any concern to, I guess, no diversification on, or additional members on that. I
You know
understand
what? I would like to make a recommendation, and this may not, but I hear what you're saying. What, could we, I don't know, I'd like to hear from the mayors. I think the way it is now, that there's a representative of the county commission and a representative of the city council, perhaps we could do away with those and then have an additional member from each organization on the, that would add 1 member.
Which
to it.
organization are you talking about?
I would say that, right now, we've got let me do the math here. We've got 9 members, right?
On the
And then we've got-
executive committee.
Right, but then they're on the board, and then we've got both mayors, and we have both,
and then it's a
then
member of the
2
city council.
executive,
And
2, and then a council member and a commissioner. And that's 9, 10, 11, 12, 13.
That's the 13.
That's the 13.
Mhm.
So if do we need an odd number? I guess we do.
It's always best to have an odd number.
Actually, I believe it's an individual appointed by the city council and the county commission, not necessarily the council members or the commissioners.
Oh, is that right? Let's see, it says, well, it says it says the mayor of Montgomery County, a representative of the city council appointed by the mayor, and a representative of the county commission.
Okay.
I think that's,
Appointed
so
and
that
approved.
means that it's, a city councilman and a commissioner, I think.
It does.
So, perhaps we could add, another representative from each organization, and then maybe just another.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes,
Jay
sir.
Alvarez, Chamber of Commerce. Can I ask this for Kyle and Suzanne? When we went over this, we've got the 3 top individuals from each of the organizations that were going to sit on the executive committee or on the board. Those are the ones that are usually meeting monthly to bring up stuff, and the full board's only meeting once a quarter. Are we saying those 3 top executives from each one of those agencies cannot go back and report back to their respective committees what's going on in the EDC itself?
No, I think they can.
Because that's what you're saying. You got the three top individuals that are going to go back and report to their own group. That's why we're looking to reduce the size of it, because the actual business gets done by those 9 individuals already in this board currently. So, and you're only bringing those other folks on once a quarter just to hear reports and just nod at what the 9 members are doing anyway, respectively. But I was trying to see the purpose if that actually truly changed anything, or those 3 individuals from each one of those boards couldn't handle the service that they were brought in to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Jay. I'm not sure why we would need to add people.
I was the one that wanted it to be reduced to 13 to begin with, so I'm fine with it like it is. I was just trying to listen to Mr. Luther to see if there was any other alternative, so.
Just, I was
Wally
just-
Crow, I've got a question, and Shannon mentioned a while ago, and maybe I didn't understand it clearly. When we have the 3, which includes the past chairman, the chairman, and the vice chair of each of the 3 entities, what happens when one of those term is up and he cannot serve any longer? How are we going to take care of that?
When a member entity has a member of the executive committee that doesn't have enough term to serve that third, there's a provision in the bylaws that just recently added, last change, that allows that member entity to appoint someone to fill that term from their board. There's still a requirement that they serve on the member entity board, but they can fill that executive committee seat from their board.
So they'll always have 3 representatives from each entity, okay?
That's correct. That wasn't always the case. Oftentimes, there would be 1 short, but they will always have equal representation.
Last call. We're at the point now where we have some bylaw amendments that are presented by Shannon this morning. We can incorporate those, and if we vote to approve these bylaws as presented with the amendments presented today, that's where we're at.
Subject to legal counsel.
Subject to
review.
legal counsel reviewing it and telling us, again, the legal counsel is they're looking to make sure we're within whatever rails of legality. Sometimes there's distinctions in language that they would prefer over what we would prefer. I think they need to be heard, but as I say to my attorney several times, you give recommendations to me and I'll decide how we want to go forward with those. So I don't believe we have to be bound by that unless there's legal issues that we have to address. So, with that unnecessary editorial comment added, are we ready to call for a motion to approve these bylaws with the amendments presented here today? If so, I would wait for somebody to make that motion.
Paul Turner, Chamber on motion.
We have a motion. Paul, thank you very much. Do I have a second?
Suzanne Langford, IDB, second.
All right, we have a first and we have a second. Any final discussion?
Mr. Chairman, I just think that it needs to be clearly stated, as you said, that the motion is to approve the bylaws with amendments subject to approval by legal counsel.
Agreed. That being said, we have a motion, we have a second. I'm going to call for all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed, like sign. We have 1. All right, the motion carries. Thank you very much. Next item on the agenda is the EDC Annual Budget Agreement. It's also in your packet here today. Do we have amendments for this? Minor?
this is the amendment, yeah, yeah. Yes, I've got a copy. Do you want me to speak to this? You'll see the annual budget agreement. After, there was some discussion about perhaps it was giving some of the organizations heartburn in that, you know, the budget agreement indicates that the bottom line, the grand total annual expense per the budget would be paid on a monthly basis. So that number divided by 12 would be due to the EDC from each organization. There was some concern that, you know, if at some point during the year there was a dramatic change, particularly concerning was if there was a decrease. For example, you had to make an adjustment in payroll or whatever, that there was nothing in the agreement to allow for a downward adjustment for that item. Likewise, you know, it could go the other way too. So I wrote a paragraph yesterday that is handed out to you, and I don't mind reading it aloud if you want me to.
Please do.
I will tell you that this has been run by legal counsel, and there was no issues with it. So let me read it. It would say, at any time during the fiscal year, there is a change resulting in an increase to the direct expenses of each organization, in parentheses, direct salaries, benefits, and taxes, shall constitute an internal budget amendment to this agreement, and the appropriate and prorated increase shall be submitted to the Economic Development Council and agreed upon by the duly authorized chairman of the organization requesting the amendment and the duly authorized chairman of the Economic Development Council. Likewise, any change resulting in a decrease to the direct expenses of each organization, which is direct salaries, benefits, and taxes, in an amount equal to or greater than $25,000 shall constitute an internal budget amendment to this agreement, which shall be submitted to the Economic Development Council and agreed upon by the duly authorized chairman of the organization requesting the amendment and the duly authorized chairman of the Economic Development Council. Once amended, the appropriate and prorated downward adjustment shall be made to the amount submitted by the organization to the Economic Development Council each and every month for the remainder of the fiscal year.
Thank you, Suzanne. Questions about that? Concerns? Comments?
Alberta Chamber, where are you going to insert it, Suzanne?
I don't know.
That's step 2.
Withdraw the question.
Maybe it shall be,
Would that be under a general provision? We just added
yes,
general
it would be
provision?
under the general provisions.
Can we make this general provision
Number 8 maybe, and then maybe the Board of Directors of the EDC shall be 9, 10, and well, that's crazy. It goes 8, 9, 15. So we need to renumber these anyway.
This would be number 8 of the general provisions.
Yes.
And then renumber the
Then
other
on the
ones.
back page, it would be 9, 10, and I guess 11.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
J. Alberta Chamber of Commerce, where do you get 15 from?
Well, it says it right here.
I think there's
Ours
been,
goes 8, 9, and 10, so I'm not sure where you're at 15.
Well, mine says 8, 9, and 15.
I'm sure that's just a typo that we will fix as we go final on this. Any comments? I don't,
Mr. Chairman?
yes.
Kyle Luther with CVB. Just want to make a comment that our board had a meeting yesterday, and this was an issue of concern expressed by pretty much all the members there. I think this could be a resolution to, I guess, alleviate some of those concerns, and I'm 100% in support of this addition.
All right, thank you. Seems to be a common sense amendment. Anybody have any concerns about adding this to this would be provision number 8. All right.
there's been, a recommendation that, let's see, review bylaws, whereas the EDC and its member entities have reviewed the bylaws of the EDC for the areas of industry, budget. I guess
I'll come back to you, Suzanne. Shannon, do we have other amendments potentially in this document?
Yes, sir. In the same vein as the one suggested for the bylaws, rather minor, but in bottom of page, well, the page number is one of those corrections. At the bottom of the first page, the phrase "of the areas of emphasis in for each job position," that is irrelevant with the proposed bylaws. That's not a part of that budget. And then same thing with on the second page, general provisions is in job positions. Would be struck. That language is inserted when the provisions of the bylaws and the proposed agreement were that the job description would be approved, each job description for all 22 employees would be approved by the board. And to simplify that with those adjustments, there won't be a need to have that reference in the document.
Did legal counsel suggest that be put in there, and has legal counsel been consulted about eliminating it?
Legal counsel did put that in there as part of the original changes they proposed, where all the job descriptions were part of the board's decision, and he has not been consulted on this.
We can certainly move forward with the same criteria that's subject to legal counsel review and approval to any of the changes we make here today in the budget agreement.
Mr. Chairman, Jowry Chamber, when you turn to that last page, when you were doing the numbering, I think you could add the amendment that Suzanne was bringing up as number 8, and I think when you get under that heading of Board of Directors, you can just take the numbers out and just use those as paragraphs, because they're really not provisions. And it would probably clean it up a little bit.
Agreed. All right, we have a budget agreement in front of us that's been reviewed. We have an amendment that would be a general provision number 8 that's presented by Suzanne that you have a copy of. And there's been a few of redactions or striking of some words and sections of this that Shannon has provided. Any other discussion, comments, or questions?
Cheryl Langford, IDB, I do have a question. Does the annual budget agreement have to be approved by each member entity board?
Shannon?
yes.
Yes.
So if we approve it today, it's just approved with the EDC, still the other 3 have to approve it
That is
before it
correct.
becomes.
It's a 4-party agreement.
This is step 1, and then they will have to dissect it and decide whether they want to agree with it or recommend changes. That would have to come back to this group because it is a four-part agreement. All right. Any other?
Mr. Chairman, if
Yes.
I may, I don't know why of the areas of emphasis for each position job were put in it. And I know we can approve this based on legal counsel's approval of it. But I would question why it would be put in there and now we're taking it out. So I'm going to make a motion that we accept Ms. Langford's amendment, that it be inserted in the bylaws or in this annual budget agreement. And I make a motion for approval, accepting that amendment only.
All right, we have a motion to accept that amendment, that Suzanne, and none of the other changes.
And the reason I say that, from a rule standpoint, if that language changes, if it's struck out, it's struck. But something else could be inserted in it that's going to be, could be actually could be totally different than what it's saying right now. And I don't think this board wants to approve something that you're not knowing what it's going to be. If you had to come back and vote on an amendment to this annual budget amendment, I think that would be the cleanest way to do it.
Okay? Shannon?
That's
do
just
you
my
have-
opinion.
Do you have commentary on that?
Nope.
No?
No, sir.
All right. We have a motion to accept Suzanne's amendment and none of the other changes that were presented by Shannon. We have a motion. Do I have a second?
Kyle
Jeff
Richter,
Turner,
CBB.
IDB. I'm sorry, I second.
Okay. We have a second. All those in favor of approving the budget with the single amendment, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? There were none. The motion passes. We have bylaws and an annual budget agreement. Thank you very much. Everybody take a little bit of a deep breath. All righty, and then next thing on the agenda is the organization progress reports. Melinda, do you have a chamber update for us?
Middle. Good morning, Melinda Shepherd with the Clarksville Chamber. We did squeak in our annual Citizens for Fort Campbell trip. It was a very successful trip, and as soon as we got back, it was COVID, so the rest of March through May has been dealing with COVID. We've been participating in webinars, hosting webinars, doing a lot of virtual meetings. We do have our first in-person meeting tomorrow, business after hours at Caldwell Banker, Conroy, Maryland, Holloman, 2147 Wilma Rudolph Boulevard, 5 to 7. Mark Holloman wants everyone there. Thank you.
Thank you, Melinda. Teresa, CVB?
Well, the CVB has been hurting for the last couple of months, but we're going to see an upswing June. The first week of June, we're at 37% occupancy in the hotel. That's an up from about 25% in May. So we're hoping we start swinging around. We will say that in the fall of the year, we've already had everything canceled except for 2 events, and those 2 events will only happen if the schools go back and have football and track and field in order for those events to come. So we're going to have a long haul of getting back to normal, or the new normal, because of all the changes in what people are and are not doing. So we don't have a whole lot of events to talk about because they're not happening yet, but hopefully soon we'll be back there.
Thank you, Teresa. Frank?
Yes, sir. Good morning, Frank Tate, Executive Director of the Industrial Development Board. Over the last quarter, we have been in the midst of uncharted waters, as both agencies have already alluded to. Although in our community nature, it is, we tend to find the rainbow at every storm. On June 10th, it was presented to the IDB Board the last quarter developments with our annual report and our working action plan. I have to say, even with the setbacks we've encountered, we are still seeing a lot of new activity. This fiscal year, we have added over 1,242 new jobs that are being added into the community. And we have worked with 4 existing companies and 2 new companies, resulting in $168 million and 61,000 investment that is being injected over the course of the next 5 years. Exciting news for all of us, and there's more. In the middle of March, we stopped on the request for information activity, but shifted all of our focus to our existing industries. As everyone had uncertain times ahead of them and the supply chain was quickly impacted, our companies and our labor force quickly went into panic mode. The 4 individuals of the IDB stepped up and took charge in accommodating information provided by the Chamber of Commerce, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, in the direction of how these organizations shall continue to proceed forward with operations. The overwhelming amount of communication and support was refreshing by the industries. They were looking out for their labor force, and they were also taking into consideration the impact that the community would have. By May, things were starting to pick back up. We have now received over 12 RFIs for this quarter and closing out the year with 19 site visits compared to last year's 25. In a moment, I will address how visits are now being handled. Also, the team has diligently been working on a few grants, and we do have good reason to believe we will be the recipient of a few in the next couple of days. Ultimately, our annual report shows positive information supporting our business retention program and how the Clarksville hiring campaign has been successful. Still, it also helps set up some trend analysis for the years to come we've not had as benchmarks in the past. Another item that I think is relevant is the office park. We're halfway there to completing the funding stream. The IDB received a unanimous vote from the County Commission, and we are currently preparing for a City Council meeting in the near future. In regards to our action plan that I mentioned moments ago, the blueprint that is set in place for the Aspire campaign provides the initiatives that we follow. It was our framework for operations last year. Thankfully, some of those initiatives have helped us to be better prepared for the new virtual demand that site visits are taking. Last year, our previous fiscal year, we conducted virtual hangar designs and speculative building designs, and currently we are working on an office park. With that being said, our in-person site visits that declined after March are now becoming virtual, and we're now selling our community on a video basis rather than an in-person view. So our creative side has really come out in our marketing department. Moving forward, we can now focus on the more tangible items, like adding jobs, investment, and focusing on industry sectors that will help us move our annual income above the 20% goal that was set in our blueprint. This plan, our action plan, is the body that we can now set goals toward, such as establishing a small business loan program, incorporating an industry survey, which we currently do not do, and factoring new incentive mechanisms not being offered currently. Lastly, it does need to be stated, although many people would say that productivity went down, productivity actually went up for this community. And the team is doing everything they can to keep us moving up and forward. In conclusion, the IDB is proceeding forward with next year's operations. We're looking at what will bring the community into a more prosperous situation with the decline that we have recently seen with our sales tax. I think that is a value statement. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Frank. Michelle, do you have an update?
I do. Good morning, everyone. Michelle Huffmeyer, Director of Communications and Marketing. Try to keep this quick. FY20 was certainly a memorable one. Just to mention one highlight from each quarter for you. In Q1, we were named the 2019 Best Place to Live, and we quickly started a digital campaign surrounding that. In Q2, we celebrated the grand opening of the Google Data Center, and we also had some of our busiest recruiting months and focused our efforts there. In Q3, we shared a collection of video and photography assets, mainly focused on industry. This is something we didn't have before, and it allowed us to showcase that. That was developed through a grant in coordination with the state of Tennessee. And in Q4, we really focused on supporting the community as a resource during COVID-19 for everything that came out up to the minute. We worked around the clock to make sure that we had the most up-to-date information. We were also fortunate enough to squeeze in a new community promotional video that will be available to you soon. Not yet available to the public, but you'll see it very shortly. Quick recap throughout the year, we focused heavily on social media and digital campaigns. This helped us to actively grow socially by over 8,400 followers and reach over 18,000 users directly engaging them. In addition to that, in a separate campaign, workforce marketing was a huge focus for us. Our Clarksville's hiring campaign, which Frank mentioned, is our local job board. This was a targeted outreach with social media, video, and radio advertising, which surpassed over 3.4 million impressions, drove over 20,000 website views, and generated over 10,000 click-throughs to direct job links. So that is connecting people with jobs available in Clarksville. So that's going to continue to be a focus for us. And lastly, what I'm most excited about, and I'm sure you will be as well, we began the process of our website overhaul. So that will be live in Q1 of 2021, and it will give us not only a fresh look, but more functionality, including video capability, interactive data graphics, secure document access, and more. And that's all.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Next up is EDC, CBID, or Aspire. Do we have any updates for that?
There's no report.
No, no report. All right. Let's move on to the public sector reports. City of Clarksville. Mr. Mayor, go ahead. Sorry.
I'm Gary Norris with the City Council. On Tuesday, June 30th, from 5 to 6:30 p.m., the city will have a forum on race and justice. This will be a virtual hall town meeting streamed from the City Council chambers. Mayor Durrett, Mayor Pitts, incoming Chief Crockrell, Sheriff John Fuson, and others will be on the panel. Richard Garrett, City Councilman, will moderate the discussion. The city is also looking for a parcel of land of at least 10 acres for a proposed new regional recreation center. Information is on the city's website if anybody's got a piece of land for sale or knows someone that does. That's all.
Thank you very much. Montgomery County?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Norris, any particular area of town that they're looking? Just curious? Everywhere? Okay, good. Mr. Chairman, real quickly, just a few items. Montgomery County approved our budget at our June informal meeting. We're happy to say there's no tax increase. It's going to be a struggle this coming year. I think I've probably said this before in public that we're a little bit different than the city of Clarksville. We don't rely on sales tax dollars as much. However, the school system does, and we fund the school system. And so we've really got a really tight year, but we're fortunate in the fact that when this virus hit, about 96% of our property taxes had already been paid. And so if it would have hit in October or something like that, it may be a different story for us. But from a revenue standpoint, we're not as affected as some of those that depend on sales tax. We are in process of trying to secure a additional campus for a middle school is our biggest need right now, but the property will include a high school and an elementary school. We've selected a site out off of Rossview Road. We're negotiating with the property owners now. And if we go forward with that site, we're also going to go forward. We've been in discussions with the state of Tennessee to improve Rossview Road from basically International Boulevard all the way out to beyond the site. There's a little road on the right. I think it's Hayes Lane. Is that the name of that little road, Suzanne? I think you travel that road every now and then. So it'll be improved out beyond the school site to Hayes Lane. And just two other things I think that are very important. Number one, we also, the county commission approved an interlocal agreement that's subject to the city of Clarksville approving it. And I think they will do that in July for the development of a business park out off of Dunlop Lane. I think that's exciting. I know Frank has done a lot of work on that, and I think all the work is now coming together. Teresa's been involved in it. We've been trying to get a conference center here for a long, long time, and I think this may make that happen. So I think that's great. And then the multipurpose event center. We have continued to work on that project. We had scheduled a groundbreaking in April. The commission has approved the sale of the bonds. We have not sold the bonds yet. Our bond counsel advises us that we probably need to have, even though Austin Peay's board has approved the agreement, the state has to approve it. Our bond counsel says we should have that in our hand before we sell our bond. But I think in the next probably 30 days, there may be some activity on that site. So just keep your eyes open. And pending any questions, that's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. All right, next up is APSU, and I know President White couldn't make it here today, so we'll just move forward. And Mr. House could also not make it here today. He's on a retreat, so I have no report from them, and I don't believe we have anybody from the state of Tennessee. All right, Looking at, we have one other item on the agenda. It's the other. Michelle, do you have something for us here? No? Oh, yes, you do? Oh, I didn't know if there's a code word. As usual, we have some outgoing board members, and we always like to recognize and thank them for their service to the organizations.
Mr. Chairman, may I add one other thing? I had a note, and I didn't even read my note. I'm sorry to interrupt Michelle's surprise, but Montgomery County, all of our offices will be open pre-COVID beginning next Monday. There's some restrictions on what the courts are doing. We don't control that. The state Supreme Court controls that. But I think it's important, this is a public meeting, and I think it's important that this information go out. We've really tried to track this data as best we could. And as the data has been presented to us, we've had some help from Austin P, from one of their professors over there, to help us analyze these numbers. And so just for y'all's information, since the 31st of March through April the 30th, one of the big indicators we looked at were positive tests related to overall tests. And so in the beginning, there wasn't a lot of tests, but that's the data that we all chose, and I think everybody's really looking at. And so testing has gone up, the amount of tests have gone up. But from March 31st to April 30th, 6.39% of all tests were positive. From March 1 to May 31st, 3.59% of all tests were positive. And I think that's important to realize what I said. We're doing more testing now, but that number's going down. And then through June, I think it's the 13th, from June 1 to June 13th, our percent of positive to overall is 3.28. And during the whole, I know we've had 5 deaths, and we don't want any deaths, and that's unfortunate. But throughout the entire process where we've been tracking data, we've had 29 hospitalizations for Montgomery Countyans. So I think that information is good for all of you to know. I know you're all business owners or work for businesses, so I'm sorry, I forgot to say that.
I appreciate that. That is good news for us. More tests and the percentage is going down. That's positive for everybody. All right. What are we doing?
Go ahead and pass the gavel.
Here's the gavel. I pass the gavel to our new incoming chairperson, Suzanne.
Thank you very much. I'm going to give this to you.
And this is a custom print that actually was commissioned. It was printed one of a kind at the APSU Goldsmith Press. Roy Acuff quote that I think stands very true for our community: "Don't be a blueprint, be an original." Clarksville, Tennessee.
Thank you very much. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom, for everything you've done. All right, is there a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
Kyle, is there a second?
Second.
Jenna, is there any discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say nay. All right, we're adjourned.